So my dad was visiting last week. He flew in from out of state, and while he was here, it's just not possible for me to do my normal routine. I just don't feel comfortable, or plus he's a more on the go person than we are, so get some planning done. So here we go. Okay, speaking of my dad and Thanksgiving, let's talk about some of the reasons I don't like Thanksgiving. Number one, starting with my dad. So as a child, Thanksgiving was pretty torturous. It meant everybody was home. My grandparents lived across the street from me, so we would all tend to have Thanksgiving together. But then it was an afternoon of my dad and my brothers watching football, screaming at the TV. Nobody went anywhere. My parents were both home, which was unusual because they worked different shifts. And my dad was often in a bad mood and angry about something. So Thanksgiving was never a holiday that I enjoyed. Okay, so as a child, there was nothing I hated more than being stuck home with all of my family. It just wasn't a pleasant experience. Fast forward to maybe junior high, early high school, when the reasons we celebrated Thanksgiving just didn't start to make sense. First of all, what did I have to be thankful for on Thanksgiving? It just seemed like it was fake. Everybody was fake on Thanksgiving. But then I started thinking about the story we'd been told our whole lives about how the Native Americans and the English white men got together and had this lovely Thanksgiving, and it just didn't make a lot of sense. So I started to question that and think, I don't really think that's what happened. I think that's the story we had been told. So it really just gave me another reason to not want to celebrate Thanksgiving. I would have preferred if we just canceled the whole holiday, but society didn't tend to agree with me. So I had to trudge on and continue to celebrate, even if I didn't want to. Once, just recently, in fact, within the past 2 years, a fellow mom asked me if I was looking forward to Thanksgiving. And I told her the truth. I said, no, I don't really like Thanksgiving. And when she asked me why not, I explained, well, it's just not my favorite holiday. But she said, oh, well, I always loved the idea of the Native Americans and the white man and their first Thanksgiving. I always thought it was just such a wonderful beginning. It's just such a wonderful thing that, we love celebrating that. And I said, yeah, but I don't really believe that really happened. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, I just don't believe that that's the true story. Like, it just seems awful convenient that you're celebrating something, meanwhile the white men were out killing the Native Americans and taking over their country, and then we're expected to believe the story of they all came together to celebrate Thanksgiving. I just don't buy it. And the friend thought and said she'd never considered that before. And to me, that was interesting. That other people have never actually considered the thought that what they've been taught about Thanksgiving or about history in general might not be the truth. Now, I will say it was actually not until I became a homeschool mom that I started learning more about history myself and started to question some of the narrative we've been given over our lives. But you know, just another reason not to celebrate Thanksgiving. Now, I grew up in a middle class, Midwestern farm family, so, my family wasn't really down with my ideas, and they tended to dismiss a lot of what I thought. Um, so, nobody really cared that I didn't like Thanksgiving. But as I grew older, I was able to start making my own decisions. As I'm reflecting on Thanksgiving, a memory comes to mind. I was probably a junior high-ish age, and I took a trip with my dad and my grandmother to a different state where relatives lived. This was an unusual occurrence to begin with. I wouldn't normally travel with my dad. We must have traveled on Thanksgiving because I remember we wanted to eat and there was no place open. Now, this was many years ago, so I think there's a glare. Sorry about that. Okay, so there were no restaurants open. We ate at a gas station, I believe, like the one gas station that was open. But here's the memory. We were staying with my dad's aunt and uncle. It didn't much seem like my aunt wanted anyone there. I remember a lot of loud noises. People talked loud and argued a lot. I believe I went because my cousin was going to be there as well. So my dad's sister was there with her family. And then their cousin lived across the street from my aunt and uncle. And my cousin and I hung out with their daughter. So a couple random things happened. Their daughter was a young teen mother and was constantly being berated by her family for the way she cared for her child. While we were all hanging out, her son must have ate something that wasn't necessarily, they weren't sure how it would affect him. I don't think it wasn't like poison, but it was perhaps he got into some Tums or something. And that resulted in us having to go to the poison control. But the way they treated that girl, yeah, it makes me sad even now. But also, so this was during Thanksgiving. My cousins and I were playing a board game, minding our own business. And my aunt decided she didn't like the way we were handling the cards on the board game, or like we were going to ruin it, which resulted in my aunt getting really mad, telling her she would buy a new board game, and I was very uncomfortable. I think my aunt got so mad they left and went home to a different, drove home to their own state. Also, she forced my dad and I to share a bed, even though they lived in a big house, and I don't know what the deal was with that, but that was something that I was not into. It felt very uncomfortable, and I was, I'm sure my dad didn't like it either, but so, that's just one more Thanksgiving memory that is crappy. I would have chosen not to happen. But as I was a teen, things became bearable because I had my own car, so I could leave and go to a friend's house, things like that. So I suffered through Thanksgiving. I know it's weird for someone to hate Thanksgiving so much, but it's just a thing. Enter marriage. When we met, I tried to be a good sport. His family usually got together on Thanksgiving. They would have in the evening, they would have a buffet type thing, hang out. I was fine. His family, I love his family. So I put forth my best effort and attended the family gatherings. And I think the issue, and I think I just started to realize that as an introvert, I could only handle so much. I didn't want people at my house, but I also didn't want to be at other people's house for an extended period of time. And because I could not control when we left necessarily, I could tell my husband, hey, I want to go, but, he didn't want to leave after an hour. And sometimes we would travel a couple hours to visit his family, or 3 hours to his dad's house. So it wasn't always feasible for us to leave. And I just needed space, which I couldn't always get. Okay, now let's talk about one of my favorite Thanksgivings ever. So it was quite a few years ago, probably 15. It was my husband's year for us to go to his family. We would alternate years on Thanksgiving. So this year we were attending his family's Thanksgiving, and it was pretty local to us. But I had 2 little kids, and I was stressed out all the time. So I got out of Thanksgiving that year. I don't know how I did it, but I just said, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Why don't you take the kids and go? And that's what he did. I think that I was probably in a bit of a depression and a lot of anxiety, and I really needed some space. And I loved it. I had the whole day to myself. I sat in my chair and I watched videos all day. This was the time when TiVo was new, so I had a bunch of things that I had recorded. I watched them all day. One mistake I made was I had planned on getting myself something to eat, and even 15 years ago in my town, there were no restaurants open. So that was a mistake. I had to make do with what I could find in my house, but I just had a really lovely day. And I still remember that as one of my favorite personal Thanksgivings. Okay, where were we? I don't know where we were, but we will move on to why I really hate Christmas now. Okay, I don't hate Christmas. We will move on to my biggest beef with Thanksgiving, and that is that 3 years ago, I was living in Kansas. I'm still living in Kansas. And my mom had come to visit, and she didn't look great. And her mind was a little, like, she was very forgetful. I was worried about her when she left. About a few days after she got home, she had went to the doctor, and they were talking about her having a fatty liver disease. Left that hospital, which isn't the greatest hospital, and they were going to send some tests off a couple days, and they were going to send some things off to be tested. My brother had contacted me and said that he thought it was really serious. That my brother had contacted me and that he and his wife thought it was very serious, and that what the doctors weren't saying, that was probably cancer. So we were waiting for the test to come back, and I asked him, do you think I should come? And he's like, I can't tell you that for sure, but you might want to think about it. So I talked to my husband, went ahead and decided that I should go ahead and drive to Ohio. This was the Friday before Thanksgiving. So I got up that morning and drove by myself. That night she had ended up having to call the squad. She had been bleeding and was not doing well at all. So I got up the next morning at my hotel, learned that she had been transferred to the better hospital in the big city. So my parents lived in Ohio, so I was driving from Kansas to Ohio. So I got up and drove straight to the hospital. She was getting ready to go in for some more testing at that time. Long story short, possibly long story short. So basically what happened was they were treating her initial issues, which were bleeding polyps. But my mom had basically been having a lot of health issues for a while, and we were able to finally speak to a doctor and say, listen, we know you're treating this, but something else is going on. There's something way more serious than just these bleeding polyps and her not being able to stop her bleeding. Please, we're like, this is what's happened. She doesn't eat. She's been in testing. She major stomach issues, and kind of outlined what had been going on for a while. They're like, okay, we'll look into it. So she was in the hospital for a few days, and I just stayed I stayed like all day at the hospital, and then I would go home at night. And she was doing okay. She was, she didn't feel well, and she was exhausted and slept a lot. So on Thanksgiving morning, we were scheduled to have a meeting with the doctors that morning to go over what was going on. And I'm the only one that went to that meeting. My siblings did not go. I don't know why. To me, it was important. They should have been there. But my dad and I were there. And that's when they told us that she had terminal cancer and that she only had a few days to a few weeks to live. So that was my Thanksgiving. So when I think of Thanksgiving, that's what I think of. That's what I think of, being told my mom's going to die. And maybe my whole life prepared me for hating Thanksgiving for this moment. I don't know. But for the past 3 years, so this will be the third year since my mom passed. So she ended up passing away 10 days after that diagnosis. So you can see if I didn't have a distaste for Thanksgiving before that. It's certainly not a time that I like to give thanks. I do have a lot to be thankful for, but I'd like to have my mom back. I'd like to be thankful that I have a mom who's healthy. So, it's just not the best. Thanksgiving doesn't have a great meaning for me, and I would just prefer that we didn't celebrate it at all. But other people feel a lot differently than I do about this holiday. And sometimes you have to compromise. And it'd be nice if sometimes that compromise went my way and not the other direction. Okay, so I hate Thanksgiving. What's the big deal, you say? Who cares? So here's the big issue. Guess what my husband's favorite holiday is? That's right, it's Thanksgiving. Why? I don't know. I don't know why he loves it, but he does. So in the past, we've compromised. He started making turkey, which he really loves to do. We would go to his family or my family, and basically I just dealt with it. I just dealt with it. And then when we moved away from family, it was, more low-key family, just us cooking for ourselves. It was more a low-key day, and we would just cook for ourselves. And as long as nobody turned on a football game, I was pretty happy. In fact, we kind of developed a tradition of watching movies, and especially we would watch the Harry Potter movie franchise every year around Thanksgiving, maybe not exactly on that day. So that was something that we enjoyed together. But the year after my mother passed, it was really hard for me. And I think the comment was made from him, well, what about me? Am I just not supposed to celebrate? I can understand his frustration, but that comment felt very harsh to me and unloving, and a real lack of empathy. Do I expect him to give up Thanksgiving for me? No, of course not. But, it would be nice to be asked, hey, how can we make this work for both of us? Because, of course, what happens is that I just keep my mouth shut and we celebrate Thanksgiving the way everybody wants to celebrate. I've tried. Last year I tried to talk my family into getting together. I thought, well, at least, we would all thought it would at least be less sad for us to be together. But nobody wanted to travel even halfway to meet. So I'm just left to my own devices on Thanksgiving. So here's my question. Do any of you hate Thanksgiving? And if so, what do you do about it? Or are there any other holidays that you and your spouse disagree on? I mean, I know Christmas is always a big one for families to try to navigate, especially when you first get married, have kids. But what about other holidays? Or I know there's probably a lot of you out there who, like me, have loss associated with holidays. How are you doing? And how are you navigating those holidays? I don't want to say happy Thanksgiving, but I will say I hope you all survived your holidays. And if you're not doing well, feel free to comment below. Be miserable together, or we can support each other together. But I'll be here sitting on my couch, probably watching a YouTube video, not cooking, not cleaning, just surviving the holidays. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, and hold your loved ones close today. Peace.